Inside XSI, each object can have operators applied to it. These operators can control the addition or subtraction of geometry, or simply deform it. Underneath every object primitive you'll find the geometry section, and this is defining the original creation state. I can go back and change this at any time, so long as I haven't frozen the construction history. A simple move component is not adding or subtracting any sort of geometry, edges, points, that sort of thing, but it is changing the topology. It doesn't have OP next to it because it's not an operator. If I were to select some of these edges here, I'll just deselect these and do an operator such as subdivide, you notice OP appears and stands for operator. All operators which add edges, points, polygons, that sort of thing will be applied into modeling because they will adjust the amount of data in my base shape. So even if I were to go to something like animation and I were to select some more components here and I were to do this, the subdivide operator still lives inside modeling because it is adjusting the original base shape. The move component on the other hand isn't adding or deleting geometry and therefore can be moved out of that construction mode. This is why deformers have a separate category. If I were to do something like a bend here, it's not adding or deleting geometry, it's simply deforming the current state that I have. Therefore this operator can be moved in and out just like the move component. The reason that these are allowed to be moved is that sometimes the deformers are required to be an animation property. So if I were to keyframe over time, there we go, I've done some animation. For the construction history, works from the top down. So if I were to select, say, my geometry and hit freeze, it's going to freeze that part of the construction history and anything below it. If I were to select subdivide and do the same thing, you can see what it's doing. We can increase the number of operators quite considerably. So if I were to do something like triangulate this, I had another operator here. In order for me not to have to open up the construction history and hit freeze all the time, we can simply freeze modeling. Anything inside the construction mode modeling will be frozen. This means I still have access to the animation properties, as you can see there. Most often these tools require some component to be selected, so if I were to have some polygons here and I were to do something like a dice in this case, it's going to work just on that component. I could have also selected object and hit dice and it will do it on the entire object. So the difference is, if I were to select some polygons again here and do something like extrude along axis, it knows that that was the selection required. If I were to undo this and be in object mode and do extrude along axis, it will give me a picking session because I have no component selected. And now I would have to select something, and there it goes. It is therefore a lot easier to define the selection parameters, polygon, edge, point, that sort of thing, before the operator is applied. So notice that even if I have my selection here and I were to do my extrude along axis, The extrude op goes inside modeling because again it is adjusting my original base shape. I can also define clusters like so, and with the cluster selected I can apply other operators. So if I were to do extrude along axis on all of these points here, each point now will be extruded, and therefore the operator is now shared between the cluster and the construction stack. Most often you won't require this, and it will be the fact that the clusters will be for things like deformers. So if I tag these points and do a deform bulge, say, automatically a cluster is created and the bulge is applied to just that selection. I could of course select my entire object and bulge that, but no cluster is created because it knows it's the entire object and not a subcomponent. So anything which will add geometry is going to go inside modeling. Anything which can be animatable will go inside any of the modes, in fact can be moved around. If I were to just freeze all of this now, but still wanted to do something animatable but inside modeling, I would leave it till the last minute so that I reduce the number of operations I have in my stack. If I were to do something like select these edges and do something like split edge, I can animate that over time. So rather than have a whole big construction history stack, I've got a much smaller one with my split edge here, and I'm still able to animate it over time.